Keanu Reeves has always believed that even the smallest kind act can change someone's life. He wasn't looking for glory in it, he was just helping out when he felt like it. 2 weeks before Super Bowl LVII, he accidentally met a guy who was washing cars, and he could not even imagine that this moment would become the greatest miracle in someone's life. The late afternoon sun cast a warm glow over the city streets as Keanu Reeves drove toward a small, unassuming car wash on the outskirts of town. It was the kind of place that most people pass by without a second glance, just another business struggling to stay afloat in a fast-moving world. But for Keanu, these ordinary places often held the most extraordinary stories. He had always found solace in the mundane, in the moments that existed outside the noise of Hollywood and flashing cameras. The world he lived in, the one filled with premieres, interviews, and international recognition, often felt detached from reality. He sought out places like this, places where life was real, where people worked hard, not for fame, but for survival. As he pulled into the lot, he noticed a boy, no older than 16, diligently scrubbing the windshield of an old sedan. His movements were methodical, practiced. He worked with the precision of someone who had done this countless times before, not out of passion but necessity. His clothes were worn but clean, his baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, shielding him from the sun as he focused on his task. Keanu sat in his car for a moment, watching. There was something about the boy's posture, something both determined and weary, as if he carried more weight on his shoulders than he should at his age. When Keanu finally stepped out, the boy barely glanced up, too focused on finishing his current task before moving on to the next. The car wash smelled of soap, damp concrete, and the faint hint of gasoline from the nearby road. Water pooled in small puddles around the lot, reflecting the fading daylight. The boy worked quickly, scrubbing, rinsing, drying, each motion seamless, as if programmed into his muscles. Keanu observed quietly, waiting his turn. A few other cars were ahead of him, each one given the same meticulous care. The boy worked without complaint, without hesitation, moving from one task to the next with quiet efficiency. It was clear he wasn't just working for pocket money. This job meant something more. When it was finally his turn, Keanu handed over the keys without fanfare, simply watching as the boy assessed the vehicle. The boy ran a practiced eye over the exterior, making a mental checklist of what needed the most attention before getting to work. He moved with purpose, not wasting a single second. As he worked, Keanu continued to observe. The boy never lingered, never let himself slow down. There was a quiet desperation to the way he worked, a need to prove something, not just to the customers, but to himself. This wasn't just a job, it was survival. Keanu had met people like him before. Young, determined, shouldering responsibilities far beyond their years. He recognized the exhaustion in the boy's movements, the way he forced himself forward despite the clear weight he carried. It was something Keanu had felt himself, once upon a time. When the boy finally finished, he wiped his hands on his jeans, stepped back, and nodded toward Keanu, signaling the job was done. Keanu retrieved his wallet, but before handing over the money, he finally spoke. He asked about the boy's work, his routine. The boy answered with short, polite responses, his tone respectful but guarded. It wasn't until Keanu mentioned the boy's cap, the logo of the Philadelphia Eagles embroidered across the front, that his demeanor changed. His eyes lit up, his posture straightened slightly. For the first time, there was something more than fatigue in his expression. He spoke about the team, about their season, about how he had followed them since childhood. There was pride in his voice, genuine enthusiasm. But there was something else too, a hesitation, a quiet acknowledgement of the reality that separated him from the world he admired. He spoke about the upcoming Super Bowl, about how it was his dream to one day see his team play on the biggest stage. But then, just as quickly as the excitement had appeared, it faded. The reality set back in, and he shrugged. "It's just a dream," he said, more to himself than to Keanu. Then he thanked him for the business, slipping back into the role of the worker rather than the fan. Keanu stood there for a moment, watching as the boy moved on to the next car. There was something about the way he had spoken about his team, about the Super Bowl. It was more than just a passing interest. It was a dream he had held on to, even knowing it was likely unattainable. Keanu had spent years in an industry where people built entire careers around making the impossible seem possible. He had seen firsthand how a single moment, a single opportunity, could change the course of someone's life. And standing there, watching the boy disappear into the evening haze of the car wash, he knew this was one of those moments. He made a decision, a quiet one, a simple one. This boy, who had spent his days washing the cars of people who lived lives he could only dream of, deserved to know what it felt like to have a dream come true. Keanu would make sure of it. The sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting long shadows across the car wash lot. Keanu sat in his car for a few minutes, watching the boy move from vehicle to vehicle, each motion as practiced and precise as before. There was a rhythm to his work, a pattern he seemed to follow without thought, each movement efficient and calculated. It was clear that this job was more than just a way to pass the time. It was survival. As Keanu drove away, the boy's words lingered in his mind. It's just a dream. How many times had he heard those words before? How many people had given up on something they truly wanted simply because the world told them it was out of reach? He had seen it too often, dreams extinguished before they had the chance to spark into reality. That night, Keanu sat alone in his hotel room, the city lights blinking in the distance. He was a man of action, not hesitation. The decision had already been made before he even realized it. He opened his laptop, navigating to a ticketing website. The VIP box seats for the Super Bowl weren't cheap, but that was irrelevant. This wasn't about money. This was about something greater. The transaction was quick. Within minutes, 2 tickets were secured. One for him. One for the boy who had unknowingly reminded Keanu of something important. That no dream, no matter how distant, should be ignored. The next morning, Keanu returned to the car wash, parking in the same spot as the day before. He watched for a moment, waiting until the boy caught sight of him. There was a flicker of recognition, but the boy didn't break his stride, continuing his work with the same quiet determination. Keanu stepped out, approaching slowly. He wasn't one for grand gestures or elaborate speeches. He simply pulled an envelope from his pocket and held it out. The boy hesitated. There was a wariness in his eyes, a guarded skepticism that came from years of knowing that good things didn't just happen to people like him. He wiped his hands on his jeans, glancing between Keanu and the envelope. He took it carefully, as if expecting it to disappear at any moment. He opened it, and for a second, his face was unreadable. Then, realization dawned. His hands trembled as he pulled out the Super Bowl ticket. His breath hitched, his eyes darting from the ticket to Keanu and back again, as if searching for some hidden trick, some cruel joke. But there was none. Keanu simply nodded. I figured you shouldn't just watch from a screen. You should be there. The boy's lips parted, but no words came. He swallowed hard, blinking rapidly as if trying to process the reality in front of him. This was real. This was happening. For a long moment, the boy simply stood there, staring at the ticket in his hand. Then slowly, he looked up at Keanu. There was something in his eyes, something beyond gratitude. It was disbelief melting into hope, a realization that, just maybe, the world wasn't as indifferent as he had once thought. Keanu clapped a hand gently on the boy's shoulder before turning away, giving him the space to absorb what had just happened. He didn't need thanks. He didn't need recognition. He only needed to know that, for one person, a dream had shifted from impossible to reality. As he walked back to his car, he heard a shaky breath behind him. Then, softly, barely audible over the hum of passing traffic, 2 words. Thank you. Keanu smiled as he drove away, knowing that in just a few days, that boy wouldn't be watching the Super Bowl from behind a TV screen. He would be there, in the heart of it all. And sometimes, that was all a dream needed, to be given the chance to come true. The days leading up to the Super Bowl passed in a blur. Keanu Reeves had done many things in his life, but this was something different. There were no cameras, no headlines, no PR spin. This was simply one person giving another a chance at something that had once felt unattainable. He thought often about the boy, imagining how he was feeling in those moments after the shock wore off. Would he stare at the ticket every night, unable to believe it was real? Would he tell his friends? Would he keep it to himself, afraid that somehow it might vanish? Keanu had been in his position before. Young, uncertain, feeling like the world was just a little too far out of reach. He knew what it was like to want something so badly and to believe, deep down, that you would never have it. That kind of doubt stayed with a person, embedded in their bones. But he also knew what it was like when someone took a chance on you, when someone reminded you that not everything in life was about luck or privilege. Sometimes it was just about kindness. Keanu spent those few days going about his usual business, but there was an underlying anticipation he couldn't shake. He knew that for the boy, the moment hadn't fully arrived yet. It wasn't until he was standing in that stadium, surrounded by tens of thousands of fans, that it would become real. Keanu could already picture him stepping into that world, into the roar of the crowd, into the sea of jerseys and flashing lights, feeling for the first time in his life like he belonged. There was something poetic about it, about the way small moments could lead to something much greater. Keanu wasn't changing the boy's entire world. He wasn't fixing every struggle he had ever faced. But maybe, just maybe, he was giving him a memory that would carry him through. Sometimes that was enough. In the days before the game, Keanu made arrangements to ensure everything was taken care of. He had seen generosity go wrong too many times, people who meant well but left things half-finished. He wasn't going to let that happen. Travel was set up. Accommodations were booked. Everything was seamless, designed so that when the day came, the boy would only have to focus on one thing: enjoying every single second. He thought back to their brief conversation about teams, about how they would be on opposite sides when the game began. He smiled at the idea, at the inevitable banter that would come from watching two people, so different yet connected by this moment, cheering against each other in the best way possible. It wasn't just about the game, it was about the experience, about the way sports had the power to unite and divide in the most joyous of ways. On the morning of the game, Keanu sent a final confirmation. He didn't need a response. He just needed to know that the boy was on his way, that everything was in place, that soon he would step into a stadium bigger than anything he had ever seen before. Keanu himself had been to many incredible places. He had stood on the sets of legendary films, walked red carpets in cities all over the world, met people who had shaped history. And yet, in that moment, he found himself looking forward to something as simple as sitting in a stadium with a kid who, just a week ago, had thought this was impossible. As he made his way toward the airport, he wondered what the boy was feeling right now. Was he nervous? Was he excited? Had he spent the last few days researching every detail of the game, planning his chance, imagining the moment his team might score? Keanu liked to think that he had. He liked to think that even before stepping foot in the stadium, the dream had already started coming true. Because that was the thing about moments like this. They didn't start when the game began. They started the second someone believed they were possible. Keanu Reeves arrived at the airport with a quiet sense of satisfaction. The journey to this moment had been an unexpected one, not because of the logistics, but because of how profoundly it had affected him. It wasn't about grandeur, not about charity or making headlines. It was simply about making a dream tangible for someone who had never imagined it could happen. The airport was bustling with travelers, most of them either heading to the Super Bowl themselves or caught in the rush of weekend flights. Keanu moved unnoticed through the crowds, content with the anonymity that came with moments like this. His flight was scheduled, his seat booked. Everything had been arranged down to the smallest detail, ensuring that when he arrived at the stadium, the boy would already be there, experiencing it all firsthand. He imagined what it must have felt like for the boy, boarding a plane, maybe for the first time, watching the landscape shrink below him, knowing that every passing second brought him closer to the stadium he had only ever seen on a screen. The realization must have been overwhelming. Dreams often felt that way when they suddenly became reality. Keanu thought about how small moments led to big ones. The simple decision to stop at a car wash had resulted in something neither of them could have predicted. It wasn't about changing someone's life in an irreversible way. It was about giving them something they could hold on to, a moment that, no matter what happened next, would always be theirs. The flight itself was smooth, unremarkable in the way that all flights felt when anticipation for the destination outweighed the journey itself. Keanu spent most of it staring out the window, letting the quiet hum of the engines settle him. When they landed, the city was alive with energy. Super Bowl week had transformed it into something electric. Streets filled with fans, banners flying, vendors selling team merchandise at every corner. Keanu had been to major sporting events before, had felt the buzz of an entire city holding its breath before the biggest game of the year, but this time it felt different. This time, he wasn't here for himself. He was here to see it through someone else's eyes. The hotel was ready, the arrangements seamless. He had ensured that the boy had everything he needed: comfortable accommodations, meals taken care of, transportation ready. It wasn't just about bringing him to the game. It was about giving him the full experience, making sure that for these few days, he felt like he belonged. As the hours ticked down, Keanu wondered how the boy was spending his time. Had he already explored the city? Taken in the sights? Was he still in disbelief, staring at the ticket as if it might disappear? More than anything, Keanu hoped he was enjoying every second, soaking it in, letting himself feel every ounce of excitement without hesitation. The night before the game, Keanu walked through the streets, taking in the energy of the city. Fans were everywhere, talking, laughing, speculating about what would happen the next day. He heard debates about players, discussions about strategy, predictions of victory and heartbreak. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind that only came from a game of this magnitude. He thought about the boy, alone in his hotel room, maybe watching pre-game coverage on TV, feeling the nerves set in. It wasn't just a game for him. It was something bigger. It was proof that sometimes the world had a way of surprising you. Keanu had always believed in moments like this. Not in grand gestures, not in extravagant displays of wealth, but in the power of showing someone that they mattered, that they were seen, that their dreams weren't foolish, that they weren't too small to be worth realizing. As he made his way back to the hotel, he knew that tomorrow would be a day the boy would never forget. And somehow, in a way he hadn't anticipated, it would be a day that Keanu wouldn't forget either.